Yeah, I heard John Cass is getting married. Well, he told me he is, yeah.
We'll call the meeting to order for the Economic Development Authority for Tuesday, May 10th to order. And I just noticed I have the wrong agenda, so. Here we go. We have a quorum present, so we'll waive the roll call. First item of business is to approve the minutes from the April 12th, 2022 meeting.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second the motion.
We have a first and second. Is there any further discussion on this matter? Hearing none, we'll call for the vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion is carried. Item 3.1, Administrative Activities Report for April 2022.
Good morning, Commissioners and President Brahm. You have the reports in your packet. I'll just highlight a few items for you. Under the public housing report, note that we did have a physical inspection of the public housing properties on April 18th. We received our preliminary score of 80. I am appealing a few items and expecting the final score to be above 90, which would get us in the high performer bracket. Note under the Home Buyer Assistance Loan Program, one application was received and approved in the amount of $7,250. Those are the only items I had to highlight for you this month.
Any other questions for Heather?
I'll offer a motion to accept the Economic Development Authority Administrative Activities Report for the month of April.
Second.
First and second. Any further discussion on the matter? Hearing none, we'll call for the vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. That motion is carried. Item 4.1, Broadway House Range Hood Replacement Project.
Yes, this is a small capital fund project that I am proposing. Within about a week during the month of April, we had to replace 3 range hoods at Broadway House Apartments. They are all original, dating back to the construction of the building in 1983. And the motors are starting to wear out, and we expect this to be an ongoing problem, so we'd like to just go ahead and install new range hoods in the remaining apartments and be done with it for another 40 years.
So would, like, the Brown County Historical Society want to have any of these hoods for display?
I don't know. I don't know if they have any historical significance.
Okay. All right.
We estimate the project to cost about $8,000, and I'm always looking for capital fund projects, so this would be a small one, but.
Sounds like it's needed.
I'll offer a motion to approve the Broadway House Range Hood Replacement Project and authorize staff to solicit bids.
I'll second that.
We have a first and second. Is there any additional discussion? Hearing none, we'll call for the vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is carried. Item 4.2, approve claims list for the month of May. Is there anything of significance or note?
The only thing I would point out is we did have to replace the deck boards on the 4th floor deck at Broadway House. That roof had leaked last year, and we had to pull the deck boards off to repair the roof. And they were just in disrepair. They weren't worth saving and putting back on, so we installed new. So you'll see the cost for Dan Stein Construction to install the new deck.
I'll make a motion to approve the EDA claims list.
I'll second the motion.
We have a first and a second. Is there any additional discussion? Hearing none, we'll call for the vote. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That is carried. Item 5.1, receive financial analysis on childcare pod model.
All right, we had a brief discussion on the pod model last month, and the commission requested more information on the financial analysis for that model. And I do have someone joining us today from First Children's Finance to go over the financial analysis. This is for discussion purposes only. No action will be taken. This is just informational and to further the discussion. I'm not sure if we have her with us on Zoom yet, or if we'll need to come back. We might need to come back when she joins us.
Okay. Will we receive like a notification when she's available?
I think,
She'll just come on the screen? Okay. So we can temporarily just table that or forego that, and then we can move on for now. And then just let us know, Heather, when we're available and ready to jump back onto that.
okay.
Which will bring us to our next item, 5.2, Oak Hills Living Center funding request. This would be consider approved funding request from Oak Hills Living Center in the amount of $50,000.
Yeah, so staff received a request for funding from Oak Hills Living Center in the amount of $50,000. They are currently fundraising for their expansion to add 15 enhanced assisted living and 15 memory care suites to their facility to meet the growing demand for senior care. This expansion will create an additional 30 specialized housing units and an additional 20 to 25 jobs in New Ulm. Housing has been identified as a major priority for the EDA. You can see as of the 2017 housing study, they did have some recommendations on that. I won't read them to you, they're in your report. We're currently in the process of updating our housing study, but we won't have the updated recommendations probably until this fall. So the 2017 information is what I have to go on as far as recommendations. The EDA has roughly $750,000 in available funds at this time. Their letter is attached, and we do have a few representatives from Oak Hills here if you would like to hear from them. So I suppose we need a motion and a second to start the discussion, or?
I'll need to make a disclosure to reflect in the minutes that I will have to abstain from the vote due to a business relationship with Oak Hills Living Center.
Heather? I didn't really understand that you sent an email out late yesterday
Mhm.
from, I think, an attorney
Mhm.
questioning that this could be a problem, or maybe it wasn't. But I didn't really understand that. Could you explain that?
Yeah, I can address that. Late in the day, I had a discussion with the city attorney, and he suggested that it might be more appropriate to consider this as a forgivable loan, perhaps, and he did not have enough time for the meeting this morning to look into that and really give me a recommendation of where we should go. He said we could go forward with the discussion as far as does the EDA support this request or not, but he asked us not to take any formal action until our next meeting so that he has had time to make a recommendation and potentially prepare documents.
I think, and this is just based on a real brief discussion Heather and I had, I think this really is sort of a fundamental thing, and it's about the mechanics of how we agree to and how we would move forward with funding requests that really fall outside the specific parameters of programs that we already have in place. So since this really doesn't fit one of our existing funding mechanisms, we kind of have to look at it a little bit differently. And I think what we're trying to do, and I think this kind of opens a broader sort of discussion about other funding requests that we have undertaken and ones that we would anticipate undertaking in the future, to kind of create the right kind of tools to enable us to do this sort of thing. So that's where I think as for today, we could really speak to if we support the concept that's being presented to us by Oak Hills, does this sound like something we would want to participate in? And personally, my thought is yes. I think it definitely meets one of the critical demands in our community, and that's of housing. And then we have to look at this specifically for our senior population, and I think there's a very critical need there as well. It's more of getting the right tools in place to put the funding forward so that it works within the guise of our current setup as an economic development authority. So we kind of want to place a certain sort of rules and guidelines to put this in place so we can then move forward with it. So that's where, if we would ask the folks from Oak Hills to please indulge upon us, just give us a little more time, I think we could come back and create a favorable situation where we can do this for you. And I, for one, I'm going to speak in support of it. I think this is exactly the sorts of things that we want to be involved with in supporting our community and its needs for a variety of types of housing. So, but we just have to kind of get the eyes.
His concern was giving $50,000 with no strings attached. We would have no way of requiring that money to be paid back if it ended up not being used for the use that they're asking for the money. You know, if they don't go forward with their expansion, they just get to keep the money. There's no agreement, there's no potential to have to pay it back if they don't use it for this purpose, is what his concern was. So he just wanted some agreement, a formal agreement, documentation, that there would be a requirement to pay it back if it's not used for the intended purpose. Does that make sense?
A clearer picture for you, or? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
But having had, experience with Oak Hills, I can't imagine that expansion isn't going to have to happen.
Right, I agree, yeah.
I mean,
I agree, but he's an attorney and he looks at all angles.
it's a wonderful facility, and I'm probably the only person in this room right now who's been a patient there for a while. 5 years ago, I skied something that was a little bit beyond my ability, I guess, and I wound up in Oak Hills for a month. And so, wonderful facility. And I would definitely be in favor of anything positive we could do for them, so.
So kind of tying back to the original concern from the attorney, what would be the process that we would need to go through to get some type of framework in place for how they would use the money? And for, excuse me, for future funding requests, when we're handing out, five figures or more, they should be accountable for that. So I guess what would be, I don't know if that's a Chris question, if that's a Heather question, but, who would draw up this agreement, and could it be something that we could apply, generally speaking, to other funding requests like this?
So it'd be almost like a professional services agreement, but our attorney would draft that up based on the parameters that are given with the request, and then sent to the requester so they can take a look at it, have their attorneys look at it, and it would be that back and forth. So our attorneys are really good about getting us stuff fairly quickly. So, I could see this being done ready for next month's with everyone's approval, getting the contract or the document over to Oak Hills for them to look at, and then back so we can put it on next month's agenda.
And do we need some type of a motion or formal action to say that we would want that to? Oh, there we go. Essentially, I would make a motion to support Oak Hills Living Center application for assistance and direct staff to work with the city attorney to review for legal compliance and prepare any documents and agreements necessary to commit such assistance to the project for EDA review and consideration at its next meeting.
There we go. It's all in red, at least in my copy.
So we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a first and second. I would just want to add, as part of the discussion, to me, I think there's two elements to this. I think there's, and we've had this discussion in the past about what I would call community development projects that maybe have some elements of economic development to them, but are maybe more so a broader scope for supporting our community. In this case, I think the need for housing really clearly demonstrates that this would fall within our framework for economic development. But I know we've had other requests that maybe is a little more gray when it comes to, does it really meet the needs or our requirements for economic development? And I don't think we want to turn our backs on that necessarily, but what I would say is, for number one, is that we maybe create a framework that would come forward for a viable community development project that has elements of economic development intertwined with it. So that would be the first part. The second part is just the mechanics of the documentation, the agreement, like Chris had suggested. On a case-by-case basis, we make a professional, I'm sorry what the term you used, but
Service agreement.
service agreement, and that would be that second element. But I would think that if we kind of put a framework on our end together, then that would create clarity for these groups and organizations that would want to come forward, so that we would clearly understand from both parties kind of what it is that we're here for and what we're all about. So that would just be my only thoughts on that, is to kind of put two phases to that, so that we can say, hey, yes, we have a program. It falls under this, what I would call community development program, and then from there, then we can create a specific tailor-made agreement between us and those parties on these situations where we want to move forward with it. So I don't know if that sounds like that would make sense, if we could bring that maybe forward next month too, just to create, because there's some things that you say, well, is this what we're really about or not? And then they have to kind of come and plead their case. I'd rather have clarity up front. I guess that would be my thought.
Right. So I'm intending to invite the city attorney to attend our next meeting so we can have further discussion on that.
That sounds great. That sounds great. So we have first and second. Is there any additional discussion? A hearing none, we'll call for the vote. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That is carried. So we ask you to come back next month and we'll have a check ready. No, I shouldn't say that. But we'll be ready to move forward, I think, with what we're able to provide for you with some sort of an agreement. So thank you very much.
Amber's on, so if you want to go back to 5.1.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. We can circle
Okay.
back to the pod model.
Okay, so Amber is here via Zoom for us to kind of give us some update. Good morning, Amber.
Good morning.
So you're going to fill in some blanks for us and provide us some information regarding a pod model and its working, so we can kind of better understand how that works and what it would look like for our community.
Absolutely. Am I able to share my screen with you guys?
Yes.
Perfect. Oh, it says participant screen sharing is disabled.
Chris is coming with a hammer.
Let's see if we can fix that, Amber.
No problem. You might have to go to participants in the control options. Let's see.
The sharing on our end.
Amber, how was your weather in Casson last night?
You know, Terry, it was just fine. I thought we would have some pretty terrible storms, but it missed us. How about for you guys?
Nothing.
Not that, yeah, it was kind of nice. I was happy. We've had enough rain and wind and all of that.
Okay, we're making you a co-host, Amber, so hopefully you'll be able to share your screen.
Perfect.
Give it a
Okay,
try.
yep, it looks like it's enabled now. All right, and I'll walk through this briefly. I know, Heather, when we met, we spent like over an hour or close to an hour going through all of this. I don't plan to do that, but please ask questions if there's something that you'd like more clarification on. So this is our analysis tool, and we're taking a brief look at just certain components of this to meet the needs of this pod model. So each of these classrooms here at the bottom, 1 through 4, represent one of the pods, and they're all set up differently to represent that each pod essentially would run as its own individual business, and therefore the provider or the owner of that business can choose to charge the rates that they want to the families. They can choose whether they are on the food program or not, and what ultimately they'll have different expenses. So there are some factors that are the same. And so before I get into the differences, we'll talk about that. The enrollment I have here modeled the same in each of the 4 pods, and this would be for 12 children. So 1 infant, 2 toddlers, 5 preschoolers, and then 2 school agers during the school year and 2 school agers during the summer. So typically a family child care license is going to max out at 12 children. So this would represent once they're up and running and they have that full enrollment. Although some providers will choose, in fact, many of them will choose to not run at a full capacity of 12 for multiple reasons. So this is kind of that like ultimate best case scenario in terms of enrollment. Also for comparison purposes, I have every single pod owner or provider being paid $15 per hour. And that amounts to about $42,900 as that annual salary before taxes or anything else is taken out. And they do not get any, this is without any additional benefits like health insurance or retirement savings and things like that. Then the other things that are the same in each pod are the expenses. And Heather and I worked together to come up with something that would be realistic. I originally had a little bit higher amount in this category, but the annual expenses for each program are going to be somewhere around maybe that $26,000 to $28,000 range. And Heather, I don't know if you want me to go through kind of how we came to these amounts, but in here we've got occupancy, so that would cover their rent, which we're projecting that to be a fairly low amount for each of them. Their renter's insurance, any repairs they might need to make or pay for that wouldn't be covered under their lease, utilities, communications like phone and internet or anything else. And internet was another talking point that perhaps that would be something that is shared throughout the building, that sort of thing. We always recommend business liability insurance. This quote might be a little bit on the high side, but that's how I prefer to do the financial modeling. We'd much rather project high and come out better at the end. Quality initiatives. This would be things like curriculum assessments, learning materials, any of their training that they need, that sort of thing. Transportation, again, this is a little bit high since I'm hoping most of the providers would be able to do most of their errands and things like that within New Ulm. That would be wonderful. But this would be their travel to get to and from training or association meetings, running, errands, things like that. Legal and professional, this would be for their accountant mostly. And then program operations, this is usually the biggest because it includes food. We project that food costs are somewhere around, $4 to $5 per day per child. And so a lot of times that equates to, of course, it equates to hundreds of dollars every month. And then when you throw in their activity supplies, their licensing fees, any sort of office supplies, equipment, advertising, things like that. This is easily the biggest expense at right around that $15,400 mark. Any questions on those similar factors so far? Okay. A few other things that are the same in each pod, their hours, their operating hours per week. We are projecting they'll be open about 10 hours per day. That's a really good average. So 50 hours total throughout the week. Of course, there are non-operating work hours. So the work that they put in outside of their open hours to meal prep, lesson plan, clean, overall be prepared for the following day. And the rates are different. So now we can start talking about some of the things that are different in each room. In this first pod that we're looking at here, they charge the lowest rate out of the four. So I looked at some of the different average rates that we have access to, and 140 was kind of on the lower tier of those scales. And so I wanted that as a starting point. And you'll notice infants are being, for a full-time infant, their weekly rate would be 140. A full-time toddler is 135 per week. A full-time preschooler, 130. And then the school ager during the summer would be 125 a week, and during the school year, $42 per week. So again, these are the lowest rates of the four. They are not charging any sort of fees, so there's no other income for this room, and they're not on the food program. This one ends up losing about $15,000 a year, and I'll show that in a report at the end. So this is not a viable model, but the other three are. So we'll look at some of the differences. So this is pod number 2. Again, the enrollment is the same. All of those things are the same. What's different? The rates are a little higher. So this one charges $150 a week for an infant and a toddler. It doesn't go down for toddlers, but then it does decrease a little bit to $145 per week for a full-time preschooler, or $140 per week for a full-time summer school age kiddo. And then of course the $45 for that school year school ager. This provider again is getting paid $15 per hour. She does, or he does, charge an annual registration and activity fee, which is going to amount to about $500 each year. And then they are on the food program, and you'll notice that's a substantial amount of income that the other provider is missing out on. So $3,640 is what we project the food program income would be based on this enrollment up here. This provider would make, at the end of the year, after paying herself and covering all expenses, would still have a profit of $2,533. So that could be a bonus. It could be put back into her program, that sort of thing. The third pod is again a little bit higher rate, so starting at 155, and then it mirrors the second pod, but the school age weekly rate is a little bit higher. This provider does charge an annual fee, but is not on the food program. And this provider is really, really close to break even. So they, at the end of the year, again, after all expenses are paid, she's been paid, or he, profit of $323. So that's kind of the, if they're not going to be on the food program, I wouldn't want to see rates lower than this. And the fourth one, the last example that I have here, has the highest rates. So this provider is at that higher level within those averages for Brown County and similar counties. And starting at 162. So this is mirroring, these rates reflect the highest reimbursement from the Child Care Assistance Program. So if the program was 4-star parent aware rated, this would be the reimbursement rate they could get through CCAP. And so that's a good reference, but a whole nother conversation. So 162 for a full-time infant, 156 per week for a full-time toddler, 150 a week for a full-time preschooler, 144 per week for a full-time school ager during the summer when they're there full days, and then 70 per week for a school ager during the school year. When we look at their additional income, they do have fees. So they're charging again, an annual fee to help offset the cost of their activities and some of their administrative work. And then also they are on the food program. So this is the most profitable of the 4 pods, as you can probably predict, and they come out with an annual profit just over $7,000. $7,135 was the projected profit for this one. So charging fees, even if it's fairly minimal, $75 per child per year to help offset costs, being on the food program, and making sure the rates are, maybe not at the lowest tier, but somewhere between that and the highest, are all recommendations. But I've shown you 3 examples here of how a family child care business could be successful in the pod model that you are looking at. What questions do you have?
Amber, is there a set or a really well-defined financial incentive for a family licensed provider to be in a pod versus being in their own home?
I think it's not necessarily financial, because they do miss out on a lot of tax deductions that they would get, by operating their business right out of their home. However, the benefit of, perhaps it's somebody who can't have a licensed program in their home, but they would love to do family childcare or care for kids. Maybe their spouse is not on board, or they just don't have they just don't have the space to do it, even if they could be licensed. I think that's going to be the number one person you will get in, interested in doing a pod business, is somebody who loves kids. They want to be in childcare, but they don't necessarily want to work at a center. But they, for whatever reason, aren't wanting to have the business in their home. And it may be an existing provider who has been in care for a couple years or many, many years and has had it and says, oh, this is my solution. I would much rather do this outside of my home. There are grants. There are startup grants through Families First, I believe, as long as they have funding available currently. And then we do also offer grants through First Children's Finance to help them, cover the costs of purchasing equipment and supplies and things like that. But any family child care provider could apply for those. It wouldn't necessarily be an incentive specific to the pod model. I do think there are other benefits as well, like the way families perceive pod models is kind of like a center. They're seeing it as there's multiple kids in one facility, there's multiple providers. It can be a really great selling point and a way to gain enrollment to provide backup care for the other pods. So if the owner of pod 1 enrolls a child that doesn't come on Fridays, they'll have an opening on Fridays to potentially take in a child from one of the other pods if that provider was sick or closed, or for whatever reason wasn't open. Families can enroll to have backup care at the other pods. So it is a really nice selling point for families to utilize pods, and can also work in a way to help gain enrollment.
They can share some of the resources though, right? I think we've had those discussions, kitchen facilities, for instance, at a offsite, although they can't all be feeding the children at the same time, but they certainly could share in those costs, or things like playground equipment and so on. So there's some sharing of resources that could be a beneficial. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and the internet is another, thing like that too, where you probably wouldn't need internet in each of the 4 different, you wouldn't need 4 different internet services and routers and all of that. It could be shared internet for the building, and therefore split cost. The playground, it depends on how big it is what I'm told. If it's licensed to hold, or to have 24 or 36 or 48 children playing on it at one time, then the kids could be out there together potentially. But if it's a smaller place, then there would have to be a schedule to prove that only one, the children from one pod are using it at one time. And there are some other, it's kind of sticky when you get into that playground discussion, because I believe if it's city owned, it doesn't matter. Just like a city park, every childcare provider in town could come to the park at one time, and licensing can't really say no to that unless the equipment is not safe for the children of that age group. If it's meant for 5 to 12-year-olds and you've got, 3 and 4-year-olds, then licensing could get involved. But that would maybe be a question for the licensor to get into that stuff.
Amber, could you explain a little bit why all the providers wouldn't want to be in the food program if it contributes in this way?
It's an additional step for them. They do need to log menus, the number of children eating each meal. It's my understanding is that it's done electronically, so it's come a long way from the paper versions back in the day, and mailing those in. So for Provider's Choice, that's one of the main food programs, I think, down here in Southeast. That would be, it's an app, they can do it all from their phone or their mobile device, logging those menus, but it is an additional planning piece. And then they do have some restrictions on what foods they can and can't serve. So each meal needs to be well balanced. One of the biggest gripes I hear is you can't do chocolate milk. So there's lots of kids who don't like, white milk. And so there are some things like that, but for the most part, providers who I've talked to that are newer and are just starting out with the food program find it very helpful. There is a food program monitor that will come unexpectedly. They do have unexpected visits or unscheduled visits where they pop in for, it's typically lunchtime or maybe an afternoon snack time, to observe, but also to teach. So they provide support and education around nutrition and healthy foods and things like that, and also about utilizing the food program. But it is definitely an additional step for them to log everything.
Thank you.
Amber, where's the pod model working? Where have you seen it work?
There is one, that's a good question. And Heather, I sent you the contact information that we were able to come up with. There's one in Fairfax, which is not too far. And there's another one, I believe, in East Grand Forks that, and some of them, they built a building specifically for this. So that's an interesting, to see how they've set that up, with bathrooms, of course, in each area. And another consideration too, I can get you the list. I can send the list to you all so that you have that. I wasn't involved in those projects since they're not in my territory. And quite frankly, they happened a few years ago before I was on board with First Children's Finance. So we do have a list of, 5 or 6 different pod models throughout the state that are currently either very close to opening or they've been open for a couple of years, or somewhere in between.
It's a fairly new option, Amber. I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you know how many years it's been available?
No, less than 7.
Yeah. So that's why there aren't a lot, because it's still kind of new.
Mm-hmm.
Amber?
There is a change. Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. You can go ahead, and I can ask a question if you had something you wanted to.
Sure. Okay. I'll just add quick. There is a change coming to licensing this July. Currently, they typically, licensing typically will only let a one business owner own one family childcare. Even so, for instance, there's a pod model, actually another one in our areas in St. Peter, in a hospital, in the hospital there, they have 2 family childcare licenses in different rooms. One is licensed under the hospital and one is licensed under the hospital foundation. So as it stands right now, there has to be a different owner for each pod, even if they're in the same building. And then they would each need their own separate address. So it would be like Suite A, Suite B, or what have you. As of July, they will let one owner have 4, be the owner on the license for 4 pods. So there's different ways you can set it up. I'm still kind of waiting to see what that looks like before I tell somebody or advise them on which way is best. So more to come on that.
My question was, again, I'm going to put you on the spot, and apologize in advance for that, but could you just briefly make the distinction between a center licensed facility and a pod? And I know, for starters, that the centers are licensed by the state and the pods are licensed locally through the county. But from there, can you just kind of briefly go through, some comparisons, compare, contrast, or whatever? What would be some advantages of one versus the other?
Absolutely. So, and that's a great question. Center, so I'll also clarify, there isn't a pod license. That isn't a thing that exists yet. It's really just a special family child care license. And so what that means is it's a family child care in a non-residential facility. So the differences between family child care and centers, the biggest one is going to be ratios, which is also why it's so hard to make a center cash flow until it gets to be 80, 90 to 100 seats. At that point, then it's much easier to cash flow. But for the smaller centers, it can be very difficult. The infant to adult ratio is 4-to-1. So one adult, only 4 infants. When you're thinking of how much income you can bring in from only 4 children versus the staffing you need, say for a room with 8 infants, you're going to lose money, especially once you allocate those general expenses that, are covered by the center as a whole. The toddler ratio is 1-to-7. So 1 adult to 7 toddlers. Again, toddlers rooms sometimes make money, but typically they're kind of at that break even level. And a lot of times they will also lose money depending on what staff hourly wages are. Preschool rooms, for a childcare center, the ratios are 1-to-10. And so preschool rooms do typically, like I personally really like to see a profit in the preschool rooms. When you have the income from 10 children's tuition coming in every week and you offset that to only 1 staff, that's much more feasible financially and much more, a lot of times that will offset the loss in the infant and toddler rooms. And then when you add in school age for a center, the ratio for that is 1-to-15. So 1 adult to 15 school agers. They're kind of the meat and potatoes, so to say, of a program. And lots of centers, especially in small communities, there may already be a SAC, like a before and after school care program, that's covering the need for your school age care. So a lot of centers will only do infant, toddler, preschool, and they only have that preschool income to offset the cost of their infants and toddlers. So it is pretty, it gets challenging to break even when your center is licensed for 42 or 60 or some of those more common smaller numbers. I'm not saying it can't be done. A lot of times it's community, it's sponsorship from local businesses and things like that, donations, that sort of thing that help those cash flow. Now, a family childcare license, that's kind of what we just looked at. The maximum capacity is 12, but to only 1 adult. And they have a lot more flexibility in, I shouldn't say a lot, but they have more flexibility to have that mixed age group. So with centers, it's very much, you separate your infants in a classroom, your toddlers, your preschoolers, a benefit, or perhaps a downfall. I think it depends on who you ask. Of family childcare would be that you do have that mixed age group. Typically it's 6 weeks up to 12 years that family providers will serve. The licensing, the licensing process for centers can take, on average, it's 12 to 18 months right now. So it's a very lengthy licensing process. Whereas a family childcare can usually get up and running if they really, keep up with the process. 3 months is kind of a good amount to plan for that startup process. There are lots of different licensing regulations that we could get into, but does that answer the question? Or
I think so. I think it illustrates that there are definitely distinctions between the two, and a lot of it just sounds like it has to do with, when it comes to centers, it's very regimented with that ratio of particular age group children to an adult, and there is more flexibility with the family base. So, I mean, for us as an EDA, for instance, if we were to look at allocating resources, I'm getting the feeling that we get more bang for our buck if we try to pursue working toward a pod modeling, especially if they're changing that license requirement, where an organization could have 4 licenses. If that's coming down the pike here this summer, that could be a much more effective tool for us to maybe get, and certainly the timing, if it's 90 days versus 18 months, we could get more spots available for children more timely, since it's perceived that our need is so critical at this time in our community. So I think you did a great job. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I'll make a motion to receive financial analysis on childcare pod model from First Children's finance staff.
Hey, we're cutting you loose, Amber.
All right.
Thank you, Amber.
Thank you,
Thank
Amber.
you.
Anyone
Do we need
want-
a second?
Anyone
I'll
want
second
to
the
offer?
motion.
There, thank you, Mark. We have first, second. Any additional discussion? Hearing none, we'll just call for the vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion is carried. We are now on to item 5.3, transfer of funds from Garden Terrace to Economic Development Authority. This is a resolution that looks like we have to offer pertaining to the transfer of $620,000.
Yes, Commissioners, this transfer, because it goes between, technically goes between funds, even though it's all within the EDA, I need a resolution for it. The transfer where I'm asking for, the $620,000, will cover all of the programs that were approved for the year, and it would also cover giving the rec center the rest of the allocation that was approved a couple of years ago. Of that $250,000 that was originally approved to go over 10 years, $50,000 has been paid to the rec center. The complication, and I'm trying to look at it from both the city and the EDA side. On the city side, it creates a complication because we have to pay all those construction costs now. I mean, we don't get to spread those out over the next 10 years. So if we don't get the EDA's full allocation right away, we end up covering that out of our general fund balance until that comes back in from the EDA. And on the EDA side, that money, is sitting there as reserved or restricted because it was already approved for a specific purpose. So it's not there as spendable cash for you either at this point in time. So that's where I'm at with that.
It's done. We have all the funding here.
Yes.
And everything there's no other additional
Yep.
costs.
And the $750,000 that Heather explained that the EDA has available is outside of that $200,000. So that's after
Right.
that $200,000 goes out.
So the difference, 620 minus the 200, so 420,000 would be coming off of the 750,000 available?
No,
No,
no, that 750
That's
was.
a different
Yep,
fund.
that, yep.
Yeah.
it's a different fund.
Yep,
Okay.
yep. I guess I don't see any reason not to do it at this point. I don't remember. I think I was the one that was kind of put my foot down on that, but it was, it's done. What's done is done, right? I think it's the facility's going and we may as well just get it taken care of. No discounted passes or anything if we, no, I'm just kidding.
I don't even get that.
And yeah, I know. My grandson loves it there. That's all I know, so.
When you say it advances up the programs that we've approved in earlier, how much does that account for? Are those specific loan programs?
Yep,
you're
so that
talking about?
covers the $50,000 in grants for the year, which actually 60,000 have gone out for the year. But some was covered by previous year's allocations. 50,000 for the home buyer assistance, 120,000 for the Get It Ready loans, 150,000 for the multifamily rehab loans, the 200,000 for the rec center, and then 50,000 that was allocated to the EDC. So that covers all of those approved programs. If those programs are not completely used or applied for this year, those would just carry forward and be
Then we
applied
might
to
not
next
need to
year's.
do as much next year. then.
Correct, yes.
Right.
Was that rec center one strictly construction related?
Yes.
Yeah, the renew money didn't kind of cover everything on the wish list, if I recall. So they came to us. And I think we also facilitated funding for the German Park Amphitheater and
Part of
then-
that, yeah.
And then,
Yeah.
yeah, and the part of the Herman Heights reconstruction of the wall. I think we put a little money toward that too.
Yes.
Thinking that some of those things have an economic development kind of benefit with bringing people into town and spending money. That was the rationale at the time. So we kind of went ahead with it. My concern, I think, at the time was like, oh, we're putting a lot of money out in a short period of time, and we've seen the continuous cash flows coming in, so I think we have the coverage for this. My only concern, and I think we're well covered with anything kind of looming over the horizon, we still have monies available. I know we had talked about the elevator potentially needing some funds, transferring from us to the city for their rehab, and I don't know where we're at with that, but, and I think the mall redevelopment might be something coming down the pike too in the future, but again, I think we're sitting in a pretty good position right now financially, so.
I will caution you though too, because, you know, all the loan programs that you have set up are not self-funding yet, and they won't be
Yeah.
self-funding, you know, until 10 years down the road. So to
Yeah.
make sure we have those funds for those
Yeah,
as well, you know, tightens those things up a little bit more.
Right, and I noticed that on like the down payment assistance, we're, what, at least 3 years out? I
Yeah, we
think at
won't
the
get another
minimum,
pay-
we're
yeah.
before they start paying back. So they're not gonna start receiving funding, and that was the way it was designed. It was to help facilitate those first-time buyers so that they didn't have to come up with their own monies right out of the chute when they're buying their first homes. We kind of deferred those payments, and then eventually it should be self-funding, and we won't need to be talking about putting money into that fund down the road. It's a ways off yet, though.
Yes, yeah.
I don't know if anyone, other questions or discussion on that, but I think it's the right thing to do, I guess, this time.
I will offer the resolution and waive the reading to transfer $620,000 from the Garden Terrace Fund 262 to the EDA Fund number 260.
Second.
First and second, is there any additional discussion? Hearing none, then we'll call for the roll call vote.
All right, Commissioner Berg? Commissioner Berg?
Yes.
Commissioner Black?
Yes.
Commissioner Becker?
Yes.
Commissioner Peterson?
Yes.
President Brum?
Yes, that is carried.
Thank you.
All right. Next item is 6.1, Garden Terrace Appraisal. I know we had spoken of this last month, and it looks like we're going to award a bid for the appraisal of the Garden Terrace apartment complex.
Yeah, Commissioner President, I did reach out to, attempted to reach out to 3 firms. 2 responded with a quote. One was Appraisal Service in Mankato for $2,400, and the other one was Robinson Appraisal and Associates for, excuse me, $2,250. I would ask that we move forward, if you want to move forward with an appraisal, to move forward with Robinson Appraisal and Associates. If approved, they said they're about 5 weeks out for doing an appraisal. So just, I wouldn't have anything until the July meeting.
And again, this is simply, at this point, informational. We kind of want to know where we're at with this asset that we own. Not that there's anything specific about its disposition or sale at this time, but, and I know we've done this when I was a commissioner in the past, we'd have the facilities appraised before, so I think this is pretty just common sense, prudent thing to do from time to time.
Yeah, you know, in my mind, it's just to help spur the conversation to see maybe it's time we do look at selling it,
Yep.
depending on where interest rates are, what we can get for it. You know, maybe it spurs other development because we no longer own it, and then we have a larger amount of cash on hand available. And if interest rates are good enough, then we're kind of making the same amount that we're making without having to manage an asset anymore. So just food for thought for us to, for the commission to look at.
I'll offer a motion to award the bid to Robinson Appraisal and Associates in the amount of $2,250.
I'll second
First and second, is there any additional discussion? Hearing none, we'll call for the vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion is carried. Item 7.1, Section 8 HCV and Public Housing Revised Income Limits.
Right, this is one of our many annual items. HUD publishes updated income limits every spring. These came out after our April meeting, so they're effective April 18th, but this is the first meeting we've had since that time. You can see the comparison from last year to this year. They have increased pretty substantially. We don't typically see this kind of increase from one year to the next. The median income for a household of four increased from $78,900 to $87,300, so that is quite a jump. The HUD decides this. There's really no discussion needed. We just need to adopt the updated income limits.
If somebody is kind of in between the old and the new, I mean, does that change anything or?
The only people it would affect are people currently on the waiting list, as far as whether they are or are not eligible for the program.
Okay,
And
thank
we
you.
we will review that.
I'll offer a motion to adopt the revised income limits for Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher and Public Housing Programs effective April 18th, 2022.
Second.
We have a first and second. Any additional discussion? Hearing none, we'll call for the vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion is carried. Item 7.2, Downtown Mural Project. Being asked to pledge up to $7,500 for completion of a downtown mural.
Commissioners, Commission President, before you have a request, the Downtown Action Team has been working with Nuvera for almost a year now to paint or put a mural on the First North Street wall. The Downtown Action Team put together a mural committee which solicited bids from local artists, from artists not from New Ulm as well. And Chuck Bennis was selected as the artist. There are a lot of local artists, or there are two local artists that were part of the selection committee to select the artist. We've been looking at a way to fund this. The committee looked at New Ulm Area Foundation to fund the entire project, but was only awarded $3,000. Total project cost is $18,000 to get the mural painted, and that's going to be an 18 foot by 60 foot, 18 feet high by 60 foot wide mural on the side of the building. So there's roughly $15,000 left, and to spur kind of donations and pledges, I was asking if the EDA would pledge up to half of the amount, $7,500, so that either the Downtown Action Team and the Chamber could look at funding the other half of that project to get it completed. This by no way means that you have to pledge that amount, but I figured it's something that, you know, when you look at downtowns across the U.S., it's something that everyone is doing now. Murals on every available wall space because it drives tourism. It gives people a place of belonging. It's basically a brick wall right now, but when you paint it, it changes it into something new and something different. You know, so this is one step in that revitalization process for downtown. I mean, Bliss was a very good example, or the Wellness Center is a very good example of painting the Bliss mural in that alley. It adds some color. It really helps revitalize that block down there. And so just asking for a pledge for this, if the Downtown Action Team and the Chamber can't come up with the other half of the money, this money will not be expended. It is not until that project is fully funded and ready to go. And attached are two examples of work that this artist has done in other places.
I noticed that Pizza Ranch is highlighted on both of the, you know, I mean, we have one too, but I don't know that I would necessarily want that on our mural defining our city, but, I mean,
They helped pay for a portion of theirs.
Yeah.
oh, that could be, okay, all right, that makes
Yeah,
sense.
and-
Well,
We're still in the process of getting a concept from him. We're getting a meeting together to go over kind of what the committee has said. Hey, here are the things, you know, that we'd like to see, but it's your interpretation of this, of these items. And then once we get a concept, Nuvera will ultimately have to approve that concept because it is their wall.
So Chris, in light of our previous discussion today about Oak Hills, do we need to take the same approach here in terms of having something drafted with the city attorney and?
For when, I would say at this current time, no, because just like Oak Hills, you're pledging and we will put that contract together if that
Okay,
money is
so a
expended.
formal
but
contract would
yeah, there would be
result
something.
after our, if we agree to support this, okay.
Yeah, because there's really, we don't have the other half of the funding there yet, so.
Is it kind of like a matching grant? We did that with CTE too, didn't we? We would say, we would put
Yeah.
every dollar they raise, we'd match, and that would be the same concept here as well?
Pretty much, yes.
Okay.
I was just really struggling how this was going to help drive economic activity, but, you know, I just thought if it's on Nuvera's building, is Nuvera going to contribute to the mural? Other
No,
than just the building?
no, they're donating the space to that building because the mural wouldn't happen without them donating the space. They did another one at one of their buildings, and I can't remember off the top of my head where they did that, but it was the same thing. They donated the side of their building, and the community came up with the funds too for the mural.
I guess I understand where you're coming from, Mark. I look at it where I think one of our things we've been talking about for some time is downtown revitalization. In my mind, this would probably go along.
Assist with that.
Yeah, in that sort of concept. Again, bringing people downtown is one of the primary drivers behind revitalizing a downtown, so I guess this would help contribute to that. And I like, we're not putting all the money on the table, and I think that was a proven and workable and a successful model for the CTE. We said, hey, we're here to assist you, we support you, but we still want you to kind of come up with and find other resources, so we're not putting all the money in, and I like that concept as well, so.
I'll make a motion for us, for the EDA to pledge up to $7,500 for the completion of the downtown mural project, pending, I guess, some renderings,
Yeah, pending kind of what we did for
rendering, you know,
an
going,
agreement
you know,
and documents.
continuing to move through the
needed.
same process.
And I'm assuming Xfinity would not be able to have anything on the side of Navarro's wall, that would, yeah.
Yeah,
Anyway,
they're parameters. So again, no copyrighted material,
Yep.
no logos, nothing like that. We've kind of drafted some stuff up that we'll send over to
No
that
pizza
Nuvera
ranch.
is currently looking at to make sure they're on board with it. But we'll send it to our city attorneys as well.
perfect. And I imagine it's gonna be a community sort of thing.
Yeah.
There's gonna be a portrait of Herman there somewhere, I imagine, maybe. I don't know. We'll have to see how that all
Although you
comes
can
out.
turn 90 degrees and stare at the real thing.
Exactly, okay. So we have a motion. Is there a second available to us today?
I'll second.
We have a first and second. Is there any additional discussion? Hearing none, we'll call for the vote. All in favor by saying aye?
Aye.
Aye. Boy, my tongue, after 9, it just goes nowhere. All in, opposed, there we go. Hearing none, we better just move on from this one right now. That motion is carried. We're down to item 8.1, accept the Economic Development Activity Report for 2022 activities.
All right, I'll just go through the items here. The New Ulm Economic Development Partnership had a strategic planning retreat during the month of April, and I'll just highlight a few takeaways from that meeting, and Chris can jump in here if I'm missing anything. One of the discussions we've bounced around is, should there be a main point of contact for economic development inquiries? Who should that be? How would that work? At the retreat, the chamber volunteered to be the main point of contact. They felt that was maybe the most logical, where businesses go to when they're looking to start a business in town or that sort of thing. So we're going to give that a try and see how it goes. So that was decided. And then also we outlined the strengths of each organization in the partnership. And at our meeting tomorrow, we're going to have further discussion on that to sort of develop, I guess, swim lanes is the term we're going with, for what Newbrick will kind of handle, what the city and the EDA will handle, what the chamber will handle, just kind of clarifying roles, to avoid duplication of efforts as much as possible. And we're just basically trying to move forward as a group with our future vision for the organization.
I would only add the only other thing that kind of tied into the one point of contact is currently most economic development incentives information is on the city website, which again isn't the easiest thing to navigate, but it's not the hardest thing to navigate either. But looking at moving forward with one website that would have all the incentives, and the different groups on there as well. I gave the group a site to look at. That's kind of where I would push everything to go. So it wouldn't be, New Ulm, mn.gov / business or economic development. It would be something easier like newulmbusiness.com or something that the partnership would have to come up with as a domain name. But something where someone could just go in, any entrepreneur, any business, and it wouldn't necessarily look like a city site, but an economic development site. So.
All right. Next report is on the RCCIP, or the child care cohort. At our last meeting, or last two meetings, we came up with 6 SMART goals and developed those. And we have scheduled a community town hall for June 14th. That will be held at Turner Hall from 6 to 8 p.m. You're all invited to attend that meeting. We will be rolling out our community action plan to the public at that meeting. Note under the Commercial Property Rehabilitation Loan Program, 2 loans closed during the month of April, Spexis and Doppelaiken Vineyards. 2 new applications were received and are pending. Under the Small Business Incentive Grant Program, 3 applications were received. We currently have 5 businesses on a waiting list for that program, and I received another application this month already, so I actually have 6 on the waiting list for that program at this time. The City Council approved extending the parking duration and adding a handicap parking stall to the public parking lot on First North Street. That came out of business visits I had with several businesses in that area that have clients who come in for appointments that last longer than an hour, and they were concerned about their clients getting parking tickets. So that change was made to alleviate that issue. Otherwise, you can see the monthly activity report there. I don't need to go through that. Any questions on any of that?
No, it sounds like you were busy, and I know you were doing a lot of business visits, so thank you for that.
So the resolution we offered earlier for transferring funds, will some of that go into the commercial property rehab program? No.
No, that is its own fund. It came from Small Cities grants or something years ago. If we put money into that fund, it would then it would be tied to that fund. So
Yeah, I mean, for all intents and purposes, it's self-funding.
It's a revolving loan fund, so as payments come
Funds become
in,
available as repayments come, because that's been around for a while.
decades, yeah.
Yeah, so,
I'll make a motion to accept the Economic Development Activity Report for April 2022 activities.
I'll second the motion.
we have a first and second. Is there any additional discussion? Hearing none, we'll call for the vote. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion is carried. Item number 9, New Ulm Business Resource and Innovation Center Report, which I like to call Newbrick. Good morning, Paul.
Copies are distributed out there, hopefully. Knowing the time is of the importance here, if there are any questions upon review of the report, please feel free to call me. I'll just highlight a couple of things. One, we're looking under point 1, Spark Ignite, which is our plans to do a business incubator. We're currently negotiating a building site for that. And the concept is there'd be shared services where there'd be offices, secretarial support, common conference rooms, things like that, and access to business mentoring. I've touched briefly on the Spark Alliance, which is a group of either New Ulm businesses or professional businesses outside that I've worked with that can assist startups in mitigating some startup costs, such as printed media, digital marketing, legal. With my background in intellectual property development, I kind of assist with trademarks and IP protection. We've also begun, and there'll be an announcement next month, that we have a new brick advisory board that is consisting of people who have gone on after living in New Ulm for a period of time and have gone on to become very successful in the field of business, both men and women, and they will meet twice a year, for which we can bounce off to them our strategies in helping New Ulm grow economically. Under Part B, number 6 is New Rain, which is an angel investment network that we'll be starting. We're going to be partnering with the Angel Investment Network Group, which is a nationwide group of angel investors, and there'll be more on that. I guess I've been focused a lot on understanding the worker shortage that we have in New Ulm. We have 5 employers that currently have about 135 job openings. And that should be concerning to all of us because all of these businesses that I won't mention here, but I think you can figure out who they are prominent property taxpayers to this community. And I think we need to ask ourselves some hard questions about what if we can't fill those jobs, especially those that are corporately controlled. What decisions are they going to make? Is it automation or is it consolidation? Because if they can't fill those roles, that's a serious issue for their bottom line. And so with that in mind, that really, knowing that deficit in workers existed, we've launched 2 initiatives. One is called the Spark Bus, and the concept there is to provide and fund a bus service that could either go to Mankato round trip, and there's also talk right now also about going west. And so we're working with the Mankato community, Region 9, and some businesses about figuring out a financial model to make that work. And then the rationale is if we don't have workers to work in these large manufacturing facilities, they really have 2 options. One is either to automate or to consolidate. If you automate, you have to have a skill set of workers that's familiar with automation, which is why we've taken on this initiative called Project Lead the Way. Project Lead the Way is a state-of-the-art STEM curriculum from K through 12, and it provides different disciplines in the sciences area for biotechnology, for computer science, and for mechanical engineering. And due to my past life, I know the executives at Project Lead the Way, and 3 of them are coming to New Ulm on June 22nd. And the goal is to have a community-wide meeting of vested shareholders, the teachers, the school board members and members of industry so that we can roll out Project Lead the Way. The goal is that we'd like New Ulm to become a Project Lead the Way community. Because if you can speak to manufacturers and people who might consider relocating here, and you can speak with one voice and say that your kids have been taught this curriculum. This is a curriculum that's been adopted by Toyota, by Lear Sigler, by Lockheed Martin, and they're doing some really innovative things in Tennessee and Kentucky with this as well, where the manufacturer is actually involved in the educational system. So once they leave high school, they move up to a 2-year institute that's literally funded by some of these companies. Now, we're not there yet, but we don't even have a consistent approach to educating our kids, whether it's in parochial school or public school. And this would be the first step in doing that. So that meeting's on the 22nd. I've been also involved in St. John's Daycare, and it's the first time I heard today that we could only do one pod model. We had the county come to our church, and they said we could do 3 pods, but from what I heard from her today, if we were to undertake a pod model, we could only do 1 pod.
Yeah, I think with the license.
With the license
so,
stuff.
like what they said in St. Peter, they had
Right.
2 entities within the one facility.
Yeah.
But, and she also said that come July, that it sounds like that law is going to change so
Yeah.
that one entity could have 4.
Right. So where it is moved to, we had a subcommittee at St. John's. St. John's is now conducting a congregational survey to see how many people would send their kids to a St. John's pod model. I think the only negative part about the pod model is that you can only care for 2 infants. And the real need in this community is infant care. And so even with a fully fledged pod model, you only can do 8 infants. So it's better than nothing, I get that, but we've got to progress, not perfection. Finally, creating long-term financial viability. So we're working hard with Region 9 and some larger foundations and looking at grant support funding and things like that so that we don't, that we can do the things that we're set out to do. Any questions?
Sounds like a lot of mileage in the short time you've been here.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Yep. Oh, website's up and running now, by the way, too, newbrick.org. So take a look at that. And more to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
So that is not anything we need to act upon. So that clears our agenda. So we're going to call this meeting adjourned.